figure out how to do some of the stuff off here. So I always end up sharing after the fact, like to just different groups and stuff. Um, it's really helpful to have somebody that's actually like there sharing, like whenever. But anyways, I think we're live. All right, we are live, and this hour we are joined by. Wait, are we live yet? Let me make sure you're live. Wait, I'm not sure. Daniel Garcia Ordez, and we are really thrilled to have him. He is a poet, he is a publisher, he is a teacher, he is a founder of festivals and a bringer of light. So we are really excited to have him here in this hour. Dan, can you tell us how you got started doing poetry?
Hi, yeah, thanks so much for having me, Matt. My name is Daniel Garcia, so my paycheck says Garcia, right? But as an artist, as a creative person, I do include my mom's last name as a way to honor her, and, in the Hispanic tradition. So I'm not Mr. Ordaz. That would have been my grandfather, but I'm Garcia or Garcia Ordaz. But yeah, I've been into. I mean, we started reading. Mom and Dad came from Mexico to the U.S., and we were born here in Houston. Later, moved to the Rio Grande Valley. And my grandma and my mom, they would sit us down Saturday, Sunday evenings, and we'd read the Bible in Spanish, like the old school, thou and thee, right, in Spanish, vosotros, and all that, the old school Spanish. And so there was that introduction, and later, I mean, looking back, I can see now, like, oh, I guess I did start writing way back when, So of course, writing comes from reading, So reading the word, reading the poetry of hymns in church and that kind of thing, kind of stays with you. The rhythm, the maybe the rhyming too, but and certainly the metaphors and all that. So I looking back, I can see that in high school I did write some couple of poems that were included in like a literary anthology, but I mean I wasn't walking around like in black with a journal, which is fine if you all did. I mean, that's lovely. I wish I did. I wish I'd had those experiences, but I did not. But I'd sit there in my Navy room sometimes, just bored with a brand new, clean stack of papers, ready to write. So basically, I got more kind of out there. There was a couple of places here in the Rio Grande Valley, McAllen, Texas. I lived in Mission, nearby McAllen. And there was a couple of places, the High Dive and the Millennial Cafe, owned by Noe Hinojosa, and I would go as the audience. I mean, I just to get the artsy stuff. I mean, buy some used CDs and listen to these poets. I was not, in the scene, or not even like sort of the jump rope, like where you think about it and then you jump in eventually. Like I wasn't even. It wasn't in part of me, even though I was writing poetry and mostly I was writing letters to girls that did not, write back, basically. Unrequited love. Sorry, Matt. Let me work on my sound here. I seem to have lost the sound. Let me check something. All right. Oh yeah, that's good. Sorry.
Okay. All right. So tell us about a mariachi poet. What is? I feel like I'm having this like weird Highlander moment with you. You know what I'm saying? You a lot of these things. You keep running your own interviews. Now you're here. I'm being interviewing you, and you got a big coffee cup. I got a coffee cup. This is like. All right. Tell us about the mariachi poet. The poet mariachi.
Yeah, my friend Dandy Pilon, she and I, and my friend Dalia Guzman, she and us three, we started this nonprofit called Art That Heals, and we would sponsor things like Coffee Talk in Rio Grande City, which is a good about hour and a half away from McAllen, but it's still part of the valley. Mm-hmm. So the valley here in South Texas, there's like 4 large counties that we call the valley, and you're considered the valley if the weatherman talks about you. If he does not or she doesn't, well, you're out somewhere else. We're not worried about you. And so we're deep South Texas. And so we started this nonprofit, and we had these coffee talk series, open mics with we'd invite some authors and stuff, and that's when I did start kind of putting my poetry out there eventually. Um, and and my friend's grandma, who just passed away very recent, a few weeks ago, Miss Gonzalez. So she said to me once, she's like, "You missed your calling, son. You young man, you missed your calling. You're a singer. You're a singer. You should sing." And so that's where the whole poet mariachi thing comes from. Is that, of course, I would do the poetry and sing as well. And she hired me, I want to say, for her 75th or 80th birthday, to sing. And I sang Elvis and country music and a little bit of everything. It was pretty neat.
Yeah. Yes, it's for our audience. Listen, can you tell them? I mean, can you expand a little bit about the Rio Grande Valley and some of the like kind of the venues and yeah. Let's talk about like the venues you would when you started reading your poetry where you would share it.
Yeah, I mean, so there was when I really got sort of serious about my own poetry and my own writing, I guess, life. Was around 1999. There was this thing called the Lopez Bar readings. And so on the other end of the valley in San Benito, which is near Harlingen, sort of near South Padre Island, if you will, if anyone recognizes that, Brownsville area. So in San Benito, this little town that's the birthplace of Freddie Fender, the hometown of Freddie Fender, they have a water tower. I mean, there's like, Texas is very flat and very spread out, and we're very suburban, basically. I mean, there's no real large rural city area. So San Benito, their downtown is kind of old and kind of dilapidated. There was this old bar called the Lopez Bar. In 1999, they had the second annual out of 5 annual Lopez Bar readings. So Raul El Indio Salinas, he was a prisoner once upon a time back in the 70s, and he had, gotten out and, changed his life, if you will, and all that, and he got into writing. And he's from Austin area. So Raul El Indio Salinas, he was part of a literary event in the valley where they would bring, through grants or whatever, they would bring authors from all over the U.S. And he was one of them that was invited to come and speak to high school kids. And so he walked into this bar after the high school event, and with one of the gentlemen from David Champion, who used to work at Region 1, which is Texas's version of like the Department of Education, if you will. They have different regions within the state. So Region 1, which is us down here, they had walked into this bar, and this about 70-year-old bar, and it was falling apart. It was dangerous. Like, it didn't meet any of the standards, for safety. So this random bar was chosen, though. Raul Salinas walked in, and he's like, "Oh my God, like we need to read here." And so they set up this reading in the summertime. And at that time, so I did not go to the very first one. I went to the subsequent, year 2 to year 5. But I heard about it so much, and so that got me excited. So I wrote a poem on a napkin, and I read it there at the open mic that night. So basically, the Lopez Bar readings, there was a Texas writer from the Valley also, David Rice. And David Rice had written "Give the Pig a Chance." And it was he had an agent from New York. I mean, he made it big, right? But he paid it forward big time, and he's still doing that. David Rice is. So he had Rene Saldana, who was not published at the time, join him at the Lopez Bar readings. Aside from Raul Salinas, they had, and I'm gonna forget a few names. I apologize, but they had Rene Saldana, who's now an award-winning poet with at least 5 books, and it's more, but we're talking about Rene Saldana, who's a professor at Texas Tech University. He has several books, including an anthology he's going to work on with Edward Vidaurre with Juventud Press. There's also Javier Garcia, again a Rio Grande Valley native, who is again also award-winning poet. I should say writer. I'm sorry, storyteller. Javier Garcia, who has written for Cinco Puntos Press from Houston area, and a lot of bilinguals books, a lot of wrestling, lucha libre type stuff. So I was so inspired. Some of the other authors are Oscar Cáceres, who wrote a book called Brownsville. He's from Brownsville, award-winning book. He's from the Iowa Writers Workshop, and he's now a professor at UT. Oscar Cáceres, and there's others again. So, but man, they were rock stars, even though they were not published yet for the most part. And I mean, I was so inspired. So, people that kind of my generation, if you will, and it's always dangerous to say like, oh, they were the first or we were the first. Like I was definitely not first of anything, and those guys were a different wave because back in the 1800s we had Jovita Gonzalez. Jovita Gonzalez, who is an amazing she was an ethnomusicologist, I should say, ethnographer. In the same vein of some of the Harlem Renaissance, poets that were poets, but also were recording, music and stories and so Jovita Gonzalez, she's from the 1800s from the Valley. Americo Paredes, who became a professor at UT, Rolando Hinojosa Smith, and John Houghton Allen, white guy, John Houghton Allen, who wrote about the Valley, and there were a couple others like Hart Stillwell, who got people like Americo Paredes, started. So there's been waves, and so our wave was like myself and Lady Mariposa, Veronica Sandoval. She's a doctoral student over in Washington State. La Erica and then Lina Suarez and several others, Amado Valderas, and so it's just Octavio Quintanilla, who was the former poet laureate of San Antonio, others like that we would see each other eventually at the open mics and that kind of thing, and we just got rolling. Then whenever I started Art That Heals with Dandy and Dahlia, when us three started it, we started having those open mics ourselves, hosting our own open mics through Art That Heals.
Yeah. You mentioned earlier in the. I'm going to mute you for this because I'm echoing. You mentioned earlier in this the Iowa Writers Workshop. So now this is intended for a wide variety of people. So not everyone's familiar with the Iowa Writers Workshop and just how large that workshop looms. Can you tell our audience a little bit about the Iowa Writers Workshop?
I mean, I'll say a little bit only. I mean, I don't know too much, but I'm from the Rio Grande Valley of deep South Texas. I say that because New Mexico, the state, has a Rio Grande Valley also, and El Paso area is where the Rio Grande in Texas, where the Rio Grande begins, as almost a trickle or a canal, and it ends at the mouth of the river, going into the Gulf of Mexico, where I'm from. So we're more of a delta, but for marketing purposes, they call us the Magic Rio Grande Valley, and they brought palm trees from Florida. Although there's some local palm trees here, but the classic palm trees that you think of Miami and stuff, they brought some of those down here. And so, but we do have a very young creative writing program here at the UT Rio Grande Valley. Now, the Iowa Writing Workshop, and I'll say just very little that I know. I mean, but it's definitely one of the most prestigious writing programs, not only in the U.S., but really it attracts people from all over the world. The Iowa Writers Workshop is just very much established, and I would say from what I know from afar that the Iowa's Writing Workshop and UT's Michener Center in Austin, UT University of Texas, are probably the top two from what I can observe. So that's definitely saying a lot. For the Iowa's Writing Workshop has produced so many talented writers.
Yeah. Another thing that was kind of interesting. You mentioned ethnographer, right? So for our audience who might not be familiar with an ethnography or what that study really is or what it means, can you tell us a little about ethnography and why Jovita Gonzalez is viewed as an early ethnographer?
Yeah. Texas, of course, as you know, and I say this with love, we're a little bit full of ourselves. Okay, if you haven't noticed already, it's not our fault. We were brought up this way, and so there is a lot of, in other words, what I mean by that, is that of course we're the Lone Star State. We're the only state that used to be its own country, and because of that, because of the geographical size. And that thing that makes us special, right?
Keep going.
Because of that, and I know you got some Dallas, connection too there. So, because of that, there's that lore, right? I don't know about other states, but in Texas,
LA, man. All right, go on. Okay, go on.
in seventh grade, you in Texas, you are required to take a Texas history a full year class as seventh graders. You know, and again, I don't know that other states have that necessarily. That's how, that's how we roll here, and it's not till eighth grade till we get into U.S. history and so on. So there's a gentleman named J. Frank Dobie. J. Frank Dobie, and there's like a building and who knows what else at University of Texas in Austin named for him. And J. Frank Dobie, a Caucasian white guy, who said to Jovita Gonzalez in the early 1900s, this is Jovita Gonzalez, born in a ranch outside of a city named Roma. She was born in Rancho Las Víboras, in a place in an unincorporated area called El Saus, and that's near Roma, Texas. So, this ranch, we're talking about the ranch life. Before 100 years ago-ish, by about 1909, 1910, white settlers came from Minnesota, from Nebraska. We're in South Texas here. And when people say South Texas, y'all, we laugh when the national news says, oh, there was a tornado in South Texas, and they're talking about San Antonio. That's Central Texas. Okay, that's 4 hours north of us. In Texas, we talk about geography by time, not by miles. So, we're very far apart from the rest of the world, right? And so Jovita Gonzalez was not part of the agricultural life that the Valley is known for. During World War II, we eventually, we fed the U.S. There were a lot of canneries here, just like there were Cannery Row in California, in Salinas, California, the Salinas Valley there, and Medina and other places in California, Santa Rosa, and all the agricultural places famous in California. The Rio Grande Valley had a lot of that. Down here, we just didn't bring the Dust Bowl people because we had workers from Mexico and from the Valley. So we switched from ranching to agriculture. So we cleared the land. We got rid of the cows, for the most part, and we started planting instead. So Jovita Gonzalez was an ethnographer, in other words, someone who records remedios, home remedies, someone who recorded old songs, ethnomusicology, someone who recorded old songs and their significance, So she recorded like some of what, for example, she recorded like Dia de San Juan. So in the Catholic religion, there's in the Catholic, flavor of Christianity, it's a date for each saint, right? And so Dia de San Juan in the ranch communities in Deep South Texas, from the Spanish, / Mexican families that lived here, on that day, there was no work. It was a day of fun, kind of rodeo type fun, skills, in other words, competition. And it was just the community of the ranch hands and their families. So on that morning, the young ladies who were not married, all the single ladies would get together, and they would dip their faces in the dew, the mist, right, of the basil flowers that were planted. So if you did that, then legend says, that you would find your true love that day at that dance that eventually followed the rodeo. These are the kind of stories that Jovita Gonzalez, wrote about. Many years after her death, somebody seeking a master's degree, a graduate student, found her unpublished manuscript called Caballero. And it talks about that romantic, ranch life, that kind of thing. But she became a Spanish teacher, eventually got married and moved to Corpus Christi. But as a single woman before that, she got her master's. And J. Frank Dobie, who could have said, hey, y'all Mexicans, your history don't count. He instead said, listen, no one better to record your history, your stories, your ethnography, right? A picture of your ethnicity, if you will. No one better than someone like you. And so he encouraged her to get her master's in studying her own people down here in the Valley, which was really, really impressive of both of them to do that.
And this again was in what time period?
Jovita Gonzalez was born in the 1800s. I don't know that. I know that. I'll share a link in the comments later on.
Yeah.
Um, but there's a handbook of Texas online, and it's run by the Texas government. Handbook of Texas online, and it'll mention Jovita Gonzalez there. Um, there's an article, in other words, with her basic story. It's like a Wikipedia for Texas, and I'm telling you, we're full of ourselves, right?
Right.
And and so again, it's she. I think her, her husband's name is attached to hers as well. I don't. I want to say it's Mireles or something like that,
Yeah.
um, but she did, collected songs and that sort of thing, and became basically that I know of, and I'm not the expert, but that I know of, one of the first people published from our region down here. Later on, Americo Paredes, the future professor at UT. Americo Paredes, he also recorded was an ethnomusicologist specifically, and so he recorded ballads like the ballad of Gregorio Cortes, which became got a treatment there in Hollywood as well, with Edward James Olmos playing Gregorio Cortes. And so that's one of the many corridos of the border wars, the ballads of border war corridos. So it's convenient in that time where Mexico's having a revolution. That was a very convenient opportunity for, unfortunately, for many whites to go ahead and usurp the lands that were left over of any ranch communities. Uh, Whatever had not been taken or purchased or stolen was definitely taken during the Bandit War era of the 1910, let's say, around that time, through that time period of the Mexican Revolution. And it was not a big deal then for us to have right here in the Valley John J. Pershing, the future American hero of World War I, the leader of the American Expeditionary Forces in World War I. He got his butt not whooped but embarrassed by not finding Pancho Villa. He started in Brownsville and worked his way up all the way to New Mexico and never captured the guy. But that exercise, that practice, I guess, helped the American soldiers eventually when they needed to go fight in France and that sort of thing.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's very interesting that, like, I live in a city where organization, anytime there's like a protest, some of that, it starts at Pershing Square, but there doesn't seem to be any knowledge of who John Pershing was or what the punitive expedition was, known as the Mexican expedition, also, the expedition to Mexico. Can you tell us a little about the Mexican expedition and what that was and its historical significance?
Yeah, I mean, I want to say, and forgive me if I get my chronology a little bit off, but this is coming off of the Spanish-American War, where John J. Pershing was a young American Army officer, and they called him Black Jack Pershing because he was in charge of the black troops. And I'm not saying that he deserves a medal for that, but I will say, maybe some kudos because he could have refused the post as well. So I don't know the details, but we can give him the benefit of the doubt for sure on that. So he had all this as a young officer. He already had John J. Pershing, Black Jack Pershing. He already had, bravado from success in the Spanish-American War, just like Teddy Roosevelt and so on. And then eventually he's a somewhat higher ranking officer, enough to where he's leading the whole movement there into New Mexico. I want to say in Deming, New Mexico. Pancho Villa, in fact, did cross over and quote unquote attack the town. Whereas it's hard to say, what other stuff he Pancho Villa may or may not have done, because he's Robin Hood in Emiliano Zapata and Pancho Villa are wanting to give land away and to the people, take away land ownership that was just being held by the mass of the powers that be, rather, where the masses were starving. And so Pancho Villa, they say here in the Valley that, the joke about, I don't know, every white guy you meet has a Cherokee grandma. You know that joke?
Yeah.
she's always a grandma, or great grandma, and she's always full blooded, you know. And I've heard from my black friends also that there's an African American sort of running joke like, oh yeah, I had a great grandmother who was Cherokee. I think on both counts, it's because I guess they want to maybe feel more American, somewhat, maybe less immigrant. I don't know what the whole take of that is. So similarly, in a way, people don't claim to be, Pancho Villa's child, although he had one wife and several kids with his non-wife, with non-wife, and then the wife knew this, like, so the wife was at Cine El Rey, back in the day, when Viva Zapata, the movie, was premiered here in the Valley. I should say, let's say, there's a movie with Freddie Fender, the country slash, the country singer Freddie Fender. There's a movie called She Came to the Valley. It's a book. It's based on a book. It's by Cleo Dawson, and Cleo Dawson writes about her mother's experience when her homesteading parents moved, to the Valley, and they traveled through the desert of Laredo, Texas. That area, it is pretty desolate. It's the Coahuilan Desert. So people claim that Pancho Villa, in that movie, in that book, Pancho Villa comes over and he's a good guy and everybody hangs out. And so everyone, a lot of families in the Valley claim that, when my great grandfather was 11 years old, man, Pancho Villa came over and he took 7 goats and he said, play me some music. And my great grandfather played the violin for Pancho Villa. Yeah. So a lot of families down here, have that great grandpa who played the violin for Pancho Villa.
Yeah, that's beautiful. So I want to touch on something you said earlier. You said that the concept of South Texas is an idea that exists in people's minds, that they don't quite really realize it. So when I got invited to come to Verso Frontera by Octavio, I saw San Antonio Poet Laureate. So I thought this was going to be in San Antonio. So I called my dad. I said, hey, Dad, I got invited to a reading in San Antonio. Maybe I'll come visit you and Angela. We'll hang out and we'll take a little drive. We'll take a short, 3-hour drive, kind of leisurely drive to San Antonio from Dallas. That'd be fun. I had no idea what I was doing. I had no idea what I was getting my father involved in. But that's where we met. The Verso Frontera. Can you tell us about that festival?
Yeah, I'll let me see if I could show you a quick map of Texas here. I don't know if it's backwards. But I mean, there's Austin in the middle, in central Texas.
We'll draw where Dallas is so you can see where I was coming from.
Oh yeah, man, Dallas. I mean,
so people know exactly what
Dallas is near Oklahoma, practically.
Yeah,
where the Star is. I mean, it's up there. It's literally because see, I'm from what we call the tip of Texas. Sometimes Brownsville calls itself the tip of Texas. Yeah. I mean, it's about it. If you're flying and taking toll roads and there's no traffic, I mean, it's 8 hours, but it could be 11 hours from us to all the way to Dallas. And so there's near Houston, there's a place called Beaumont where oil was first sort of struck. Oil. Yeah. And so there's a arena that right here in Beaumont, Texas, called South Texas Arena. So we're down here, I mean, it's crazy though, but hey, you're going to get all kinds of stuff, man. The Verso Frontera. So yeah, the founder of that is Octavio Quintanilla, who is originally from the Valley. I forget what city, forgive me, but he's originally from the Valley and eventually got his PhD out there in the San Antonio area and moved, and he's been a San Antonio guy for a couple decades or so. And so Verso Frontera was his new hopefully an annual event. It was very powerful. So recently the trend is that the long story short is that we used to have two major universities down here in the Valley, and the state legislature a few years ago said, we want to give y'all some more money, but the only way by law to do that is to merge into one. It has to be a new school to tap into the oil, the old school land grant money, if you will, that says, those mineral rights are belong to the universities or go to the universities. So a lot of the oil money goes to the big schools in Texas. Well, we had to tap into it by becoming a new school. So UT Brownsville, UT Pan American merged into one university, UTRGV. And so recently, Texas A&M built a physical campus in McAllen, and whoever graduates from there there is no Texas A&M McAllen. There will be Texas A&M graduates, period. Just happens to be to the buildings here. Yeah. Our Lady of the Lake and a few others, Shriner and a few other universities in Texas, they've been establishing campuses down here. And so Verso Frontera was held there at the Our Lady of the Lake campus in La Feria, Texas, which is not known for anything else except being the birthplace, the hometown of Amalia Ortiz, deaf poet.
Yeah. All right. I want you to tell about your own festival. Before you do that, can you share with us a poem?
Oh, sure. Today is Dia de los Niños in Mexico and perhaps in Latin America. And so I have a book that's it's not out yet. It's in my hand, but it's still a work in progress. But I like the book in my hand before I don't like just to stare at a screen. So it's called Read Until You Bleed, and it's a book of children's poetry.
Before you start, you wrote a children's book of poetry called Read Until You Bleed.
Read Until You Bleed. I know that's
That's tough love, but that's some sexist shit. But go on.
No, man, that's Compton, man. I grew up with Public Enemy and freaking the boys from Compton over here.
All right.
NWA, man. Tell you what, that Navy barracks, man. We were the guys that were about to graduate from hospital corps school to become a medical dude, right? The guys who were about to graduate, every morning they'd play Guns N' Roses, Patience. I mean, every morning. Closer to the time they were graduating, man, we would wake them up with NWA, Abraham too was black. I mean, it was the aggressive. It was good stuff. So, yes, I wrote a children's book called Read Until You Bleed. I was talking to some third graders a couple years ago here from McAllen, and I was invited to go to their school by a librarian, and the librarian said, inspire them to keep reading, and it just came out of my mouth. Read until you bleed, and the kids ate it up. They thought it was awesome. That's some passion. And so I queried kids and teachers and librarians, and they're like, yeah, that's the title. That's the one you want to go with. So this is a poem called A Pink Alligator. I wish I had a pink alligator. I'd call him Croc or see you later. He'd wear a tutu on Friday nights. We'd stroll the lake to cause some frights. He'd have a social media page and make $1 million wage. He'd crush some Lego towers for fun or play Godzilla on the run. He'd be invited to all the quinceañeras, dance with the morenitas and the güeras. He'd learn the cha-cha and sachet and drink soy lattes at a cafe. So, yeah, working on that.
Yeah.
And I'll share a couple other ones later if there's time.
Oh, there'll be plenty of time. So what is so when you sit down and you set your mind to write like a children's poetry, how does that differ from writing your other work?
I mean, going back to your first question about what how I became a poet, if you will, to answer this question. My brother Max, our oldest brother, mom and dad had 9 kids. Okay, we're old school Mexicans, man. So my mom and dad came from Mexico. My mom's from Monterrey. My dad's from Jalisco, and life was tough and all that. But 9 kids, man, that's a lot of us. So my brother Max was killed in a car crash in 1997. I was in my early 20s, and it was traumatic. Of course, I mean we were devastated. I mean, we barely got through, the funeral and all that whole experience. I mean, it's just even now, all these years later, Matt, I mean, people ask me how many siblings I have, and I have to count them, and I have to say them by name because I don't know. I don't know the number. It's just odd. My reaction to his death a few days later was to start writing poetry. And again, this is but good 2 solid years before I started calling myself a poet or even being out there. This is just my physical reaction was to write poetry, and it came out as humorous poetry. It's one of the several things that I see now looking back that God did to kind of help to heal me, get through the situation, and I felt, of course, a little bit guilty, that I was writing these funny poems, but that's just what came out of me was humor. And so some of the poems in here are older than anything else I've ever, written, essentially. And they've never really seen the light of day except a few copies to my nieces and nephews growing up, that kind of thing, and friends and stuff. So I don't know. I mean, the process, I definitely am just open to whatever the universe is wanting to say. People will say things to me or about me, things like, "Oh, that's not how you write. This isn't you." When I share a political piece, what I call an angry poem, if you will, because children's or not, a lot of the stuff that I write comes out with some kind of humor. And so when I write something in your face or whatever, they'll be like, "Oh, this is not you." It's like, "Yo, mama, this is me." You just don't see it all the time. So I don't know that the process is much different, but I definitely let it flow. I do use rhyming at times, often, and I use rhythm a lot. So I'll get a certain beat that just stays with me. I'll be out with the plants or in the shower or whatever, and I'll get this line in my head, and it stays with me. And that line in my head will be what I throw down on paper, and it sometimes becomes something, and sometimes it dies on the page. And though, it becomes fodder for for the seed that will come in the future. A piece of that sort of remains, even if it's crap, that you want to throw away, and I often do. But and sometimes the poem wants to be written by hand on paper, and sometimes it wants to be typed.
Yeah. So this past weekend you hosted a poetry festival. Can you tell us a little about that?
Yeah, going back to the Lopez Bar reading. Sorry.
Yeah, well, first of all, tell us the history of it, but then also tell us what is it like to migrate that to an online platform. I think a lot of people like, how are we going to do this? So tell us all about that.
Yeah, it was pretty crazy. It was pretty intense. Going back to the Lopez Bar readings, I mean, and the High Dive and the Millennium, and the owner of one of those, hangouts, coffee shops, Noe Hinojosa. Eventually, he had this publication, a journal of the arts called the Mesquite Review, the Mesquite Review, and boy, I mean, it had essays, poetry, lyrics, interviews, travel pieces, and certainly painters and so on, visual artists for sure. And all that is also part of our story, And again, I don't ever want to claim like, oh, we were the first festival, because I'm not a historian. There may have been others, But as far as we know, yeah, we were definitely, as far as we know, the first ongoing annual poetry festival. So the Rio Grande Valley International Poetry Festival, we call it BIPF. It started really with a poetry pachanga. So in around 2007, I was invited by a young professor, Emmy Perez, who is now the Texas Poet Laureate of 2020. But back then, she was a new professor, and she invited me to read as a featured person to come into the university and visit with the students as an evening performance. And I asked her, can I invite a few friends just to change it up, because I was, I didn't want to. I was just tired of being myself on stage or whatever. I'm a social person, so I want to. Hey, let me bring my buddies, and she was open to it. So we put the word out through email before social media existed, right? Through websites here and there, like from Art That Heals and that kind of thing. And we have 14 poets some of them had never met, and I met them that night. We had 14 poets that signed up. We pitched in a little bit of money, got some tamales and some chips and salsa, and made T-shirts. So we had this event called the Poetry Pachanga at University of Texas Pan American, and we had over 100 people at different times of the night. At the highest point, about 70 something people. One of our poets, Melitón Hinojosa, his son flew from California to South Texas, and there's no large airport hub. You got to land in Houston or Dallas and then take another plane to McAllen. He flew out just to see his dad read for 10 minutes, and that's part of our story as well, is that, like, then we said, Brenda Nettles Riojas and I afterwards walked to the parking lot and said, hey, you know what? The Valley's ready for a festival, and let's get this done. So Brenda Nettles Riojas works for the Diocese of Brownsville, for the Catholic Diocese. She's met the popes and all that. She's been there, like, I mean, like back behind the scenes. She's phenomenal, and she's traveled the world. They don't really give each other Christmas gifts or whatever. They save their money, and she and her family, they travel the world. She has 2 wonderful kids and an awesome husband. So Brenda and I, we've known each other for years, and we said, hey, it's time. So yeah, we just got this thing going. It's a 4-day festival. Thursday, we have an anthology, and this year, of course, it was virtual. It took some work, man, to coordinate that. So my press, El Zarape Press, has published the anthology for VIPF from the very beginning, since 2008, and so it's the 13th Poetry Pachanga, annual Poetry Pachanga. But so this year we'll have, in summer, when we're released from this coronavirus thing, we're going to have a Poetry Pachanga, at some point this summer, I hope. And that'll be the 14th one, but we're in the 13th year of VIPF. So it's a 4-day festival. Thursday, we have an anthology release and / opening reception, where we meet introduce the featured poets and that sort of thing. The city of McAllen usually has been our host, although Mission and Edinburgh have also been our host in that area. Friday, we have poets in the schools all across the Valley. And so the Valley is this region of 4 counties with about 4 major cities, 2 airports, South Padre Island, maybe you've heard of it from MTV or whatever. And so we're maybe the only festival that I know of that has concurrent readings. In the past, we've had concurrent readings literally happening at the same time in Mexico, in North Mexico, at the Mexican consulate in McAllen, or in Mexico in Matamoros, which is across from Brownsville, or in Reynosa, which is across from McAllen. So readings, and we would have readings all over the Valley, and then we would meet at the end of the day with this Poetry Pachanga, have dinner together. And that's what makes us different a little bit also, is that few things. The anthology is open to everyone. You don't have to register to be part of the anthology. So that makes us unique. Friday night, we have a poetry slam. Saturday, we have all these workshops all over the place, and readings and different events. And then we have the Poetry Pachanga, which starts with dinner. So we feed the poets. That's part of our festival. And every single registered poet shares the mic also with the featured poets.
Yeah. You mentioned the anthology Boundless being published by El Zarape Press. Can you tell us more about El Zarape Press?
Yeah. And so we started El Zarape Press. Our first author was someone who used to help us out with the Poetry Festival, Vanessa Brown, and it's a chapbook, right? And but it's our first book. We also had Arnulfo Vigil from Monterrey, from Mexico, and so we were very international in that way. And we wanted to bring our slogan is we bring fresh voices to the literary conversation, because at that time, and I know you've heard in recent interviews about the plethora of poetry, everything in the Valley, the plethora of opportunities and stuff. And at that time, frankly, the Lopez Bar readings, those guys were all fiction writers with a poet or 2 here and there, but they were primarily fiction writers. And so when we used to go to open mic, when I started as a poet, I mean, people would be sharing chapters from their novel. People would be reading a 15, 16-minute short story. And then it's like, oh, and the poets were an afterthought. And I feel a little bit guilty, because not on purpose, but we flipped the screen on that. It's like, and And when I have an actual open mic, which I haven't hosted one in a while, but when I do, I mean, I make it a point to include storytellers as well, because usually it's just puro poets now. It's
Yeah.
just it's gone the other way. But at Set Up a Press at that time, like I said, there was almost no opportunities for poetry, and presses that did exist, had kind of died away from the 1960s and 70s and 80s and 90s. That had small presses that would either say no, thank you, or they were on their way on their deathbed. So I Set Up a Press. Eventually, I did self-publish my book, it was a chapbook at first, because I got tired of giving free copies away. People would be like, "Oh, my abuelita would love that one. Can I have it?" And I was like, "Oh," I was so honored and awed that I would give. And I was like, "Wait, I'm going broke." So I did like
Going broke with all this honor.
yeah. So I made a chapbook, and the cover is these African American kids in Chicago playing the drums on those white buckets. It's if you ever been to Chicago Art Institute, they're just always there. It's just real neat. So my book is, what I'm saying, and so it's a mariachi kind of maybe in meditation or prayer. He's like taking a breath before he looks up and starts singing. So it's about to start the conversation. It's called, What I'm Saying, and that's self-published. It's been, even as a chapbook, Matt. It was taught at universities.
Wow.
In linguistics classes, especially, and in poetry classes and so on. And there's people from China there's a lady from China that is looking at using some of my poetry in her dissertation. So it's gone very well. And just locally and around, if you just Google, people's syllabi or whatever, it comes up sometimes, in New York and just all over the U.S. and other Riverside, UC Riverside, and other places in California that have been using my book for at least at some point, on and off. So I Set Up a Press, because of I guess more because of that book, and yes, I'm self-published, so, but of course I marketed the heck out of that one. My friend's chapbook was more of a local, for her family and that sort of thing, for posterity. And my friend from Monterrey, he had his own marketing over there, but my book, kind of just took off. And so subsequently, we did publish, like I said, the Rio Grande Valley International Poetry Festival, which included eventually a youth anthology. And so Flower Song Press, this year, I asked Edward to actually, Brenda and I, after our 10th VIPF, we asked Edward to take over the festival, but he's got so much on his hands that we're still helping each other out with it. But I'm ready, Edward. I'm ready, to hand it over, man. It's a labor of love. It's 13 years is a lot. So
yeah. Well, you mentioned Flower Song Books. Your latest collection of poetry was published on Flower Song Books, if I'm not mistaken. Can you share a poem from that?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and and this year, we were blessed to have the Poetry Festival online. But yeah, it took a lot of work. I mean, we looked at Zoom, we looked at Google, all that, and we ended up going with StreamYard for a lot of the stuff. But we had some live events like workshops where we actually invited people on camera to ask questions as well and interact. And I want to say real quick, our Poetry Festival ends on Sunday, our 4th day, with a visit to the Panteon, to the cemetery of Gloria Anzaldúa, the Chicana writer who's here from the Valley. And so she was born in Raymondville. If you go to Wikipedia, it says she's born in Harlingen, but she's born in Raymondville in a hospital that doesn't exist. And she grew up in Hargill, not Harlingen, tiny community that used to be have a big railroad back in the day. So we on Sunday we had this live panel discussion with about Gloria Anzaldúa. So it went really well. And so my book, Sensontle Mockingbird, it is dedicated and inspired by Gloria Anzaldúa and Maya Angelou. And so, so Gloria Anzaldúa is Sensontle and Maya Angelou is Mockingbird, if you will. So I'll go ahead and read Mockingbird for Maya Angelou, if you don't mind.
I love it.
Sorry, did you say for me to read or just talk about it? I don't know.
I would love for you to read a poem. Yeah.
Yeah. So
You can
yeah,
put
I was blessed to have my book. This is a book that is essentially my MFA thesis. Now the thesis has a critical introduction that's like 30 something pages long, of course, so that's not in here. But essentially the work from it and older pieces and so on and reworked that was published. So I approached. It's funny, Matt. Floricanto Press from San Diego or somewhere in California, I forget. But Floricanto Press from California, no, if you're watching, no hard feelings, or it's just their communication was at a snail's pace. It would take 3 months between emails, and I didn't think they were interested in my book.
So before,
all of a sudden,
yeah, go ahead.
yeah, literally the week that this was supposed to come out, they're like, hey, we want your book, but their emails were few and far between and not very clear, and so I considered self-publishing, but Edward Vidaude became the publisher for Flower Song Press, and he wanted my book. So
before we do your poem, then let's this is a nice segue into Flower Song. The press itself, run by Edward, it's really describe your experience with Flower Song.
Yeah, I mean, the Valley is got a tight writing community. That said, I mean, it doesn't mean we're all tight. I mean, there's 1.5 million people in the Valley. I do not know all the poets. Not every poet knows me. I'm the guy that was sitting in the back of the Millennium, just listening to the poets, and so I do get a lot of love and I appreciate it. But I mean, there's been so much. There's so many other mini communities of poetry, like Gabriel mentioned. Like in Brownsville, there's a community of Spanish poets who read primarily in Spanish, and some of them were involved in Frontera, I should say. In what was the one from Octavio?
Octavio, the book, or
the Octavio Quintanilla's where I met you in La Feria, the event.
Oh, Verso Frontera.
Thank you, Verso Frontera. And so back in the 1990s, there was these encuentros, findings, I guess, coming togethers, get-togethers, encuentros where Mexican and Spanish-speaking poets would get together in Reynosa and sometimes even in the Valley, but they were very inclusive, and now with VIPF, we've always included at least one poet from that community, if you will, an international person from Mexico normally, but there's been a few others, and so there's a lot of pockets of different communities. So Flower Song has brought I think helped to bring all that together. I think a little bit more than El Sarape Press and others. In as you pointed out, so he's had some books that are in Spanish. With El Sarape Press, we had Spanish books, bilingual books, and then like Tex-Mex books as well. And then
what is the Tex-Mex book? What are you doing here?
And then Flower Song, though, I mean, it started as David Bowles, the award-winning poet and fiction writer, a novelist, and I mean, he's got some stuff going on in Hollywood, that sort of thing. He's a local professor, but so David Bowles started VAO Publishing. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure what it meant, but VAO Publishing transitioned into Flower Song Books, and Juventud as well is one of the is a book that came out that was edited by René Saldaña and Erica Garza, but eventually now it's an imprint of Flower Song Books. And so whenever I met Edward, because look, this is kind of meta or whatever, but people will say things like, "Oh, Daniel this and Daniel that," and I appreciate it, but that's new and that's whatever, and there's a lot of Daniels out there. There's a lot of people out there that are doing amazing things in their own communities. Like our dearly departed, the first day of our poetry festival, we lost a friend, a poet, Roberto de la Torre. He used to have his own community of poets from Mexico, from Latin America, that would come here to McAllen, and he's very well known in San Antonio, Dallas, and other parts of the country, and so he was a lovely guy who brought people together in a different way. And so whenever I met Edward, people told him like, oh, blah blah blah, pss, pss, Daniel, pss, pss, poetry, whatever, and he thought I was going to be a jerk, and a lot of people do, sometimes. Who knows? Because there's going to be haters in every community, and there's going to be jealous people in every community, and whatever. That's their issue. And so whenever Edward and I met, it was great, and we're like brothers, man, and sincerely. And so. And we fight and we argue and we don't talk to each other for 2-3 weeks or whatever, because that's legit. We're sincere about how we feel about each other, and so we hit it off as friends, and I was glad, man, because I was like, man, I'm done with open mics and like hosting stuff. In other words, like, you take over, just like that. And for a long time he had Pasta Poetry and Vino, that kind of thing, and so he's been a blessing to the writing community. And it's like now it's like a tag team, kind of like wrestling. Julieta Corpus, she's a great writer. She's one of those poets who writes in Spanish translation, who leads translation workshops, who writes in Spanish, who writes in English, who writes in Tex-Mex, who is part of VIPF, who's part of the different Spanish speaking readings and that kind of thing. And so Julieta leads workshops in person, online. Edward does stuff, so it's more of a tag team and passing of the baton, that sort of thing, and it's been great to be able to work with Edward. I don't know. I mean, I guess my self-publishing, I published some of his books. I was not the first to publish his book. I think it was the second and third books that I published, if I remember correctly.
So I have kind of a journalistic question. Why do Texans insist on calling Spanglish Tex-Mex?
Well, we call it Spanglish also, but part of it, like I said, is going back to the whole Lone Star State thing. I think part of it,
yeah.
But I mean, it's our reality in the sense because of this. We were people from the 1500s that have been here since the 1500s. St. Augustine, Florida, if you Google it, is known as the first oldest, continuous community of Europeans in the United States, in the United States of America, St. Augustine, Florida. But in fact, here in deep South Texas, on the border, on the river, there's been some Spaniards here since the 1500s, and those Spaniards, and I'm saying Spaniards on purpose, sure, they may have eventually, not right away, maybe intermarried with the Native Americans and that sort of thing, but they never moved, and they were Spaniards. They were from New Spain. They never moved. The ranch was in New Spain, and then boom, Mexico has a revolution. So now they're Mexicans, but they've never moved. Now there's this new country and called Texas, but now Texas is way north of us. The border of Texas was in Nueces River, which is Corpus Christi, which is it's about 2 hours, almost really 3 hours north of us. It's a lot closer to San Antonio, and so people down here were not Texans. They became Texans when the U.S. got Texas, right, in 1845, and all of a sudden you're Spaniard. You maybe never even married a mestizo or a Mexican girl. You married each other's ranching families, and so you're super Spaniard. And all of a sudden you're Mexican, and all of a sudden you're Texan / American, and you've never moved, right? And so we didn't cross the border crossed us, right? Now, I'm not from the old 1500s ranching families, but a lot of people in the valley are, like Gloria and Saldua. I mean, it's not to insult anyone when we say Tex-Mex. In fact, it's in fact an insult for us by Mexicans. For example, a Mexican will say, "Oh, those enchiladas in McAllen, Texas, those are not Mexican; they're Tex-Mex." So
Ah,
they mean it. They use it as an insult in a way. And I'm not saying the biggest offense. Okay, Mexicans like to rib on each other, you know.
yeah, yeah. What
Uh,
about Californians say that?
but I mean, even well, I tell even El Paso ones. Okay, people
Yeah.
from El Chuco, right? So El Paso people, they don't like our enchiladas from down in the valley. Their enchiladas, the Coahuilan desert, right, are dry like the desert. Their enchiladas don't have, and I don't mean that as an offense. I'm saying as a fact. It's, in other words, our enchiladas here are covered in way too much sauce, enchilada sauce, and smothered in cheese. I mean, it's drowned in cheese. Whereas
God,
the El Paso enchiladas are more subtle. You know, it's the red chile, and you can see the tortilla. We can't see the tortilla. It's under layers of sauce and cheese here.
yes,
So
yes.
not everybody likes our enchiladas.
Uh, s- uh, so okay, so now let's move to neutral ground. What do you think of New Mexican food?
Honestly, I mean, I've driven through. I've driven through. I've never had it, so I mean, I'm sure it's lovely. I know there's a lot of chiles involved from my cousins that live there. You know, the dried chiles and all that, and I use their chiles in my cooking, like pozole and so on. But I mean, I can't say I've not even hardly really on September 11th, 2001, the day of the attacks. Um, the night before, Monday night, I was in the Navy as a reservist, so I was not full time Navy active duty anymore. We had landed the night before in San Diego, California, as a medical dude, as a hospital corpsman. Uh, we take care of one hospital corpsman takes care of 30 Marines, and so I was part of a small unit of people from all over Texas, mostly the Valley, though. And we were flown in to teach a week-long class to law enforcement folks who are fighting narcotics and so on. So not the political side of it. We were just there to teach advanced first aid techniques, which sadly they're teaching that now to teachers because of school shootings.
Mhm.
How to apply a tourniquet and so on, how to deal with a bullet wound, how
Still
to
good.
stop a sucking chest wound. That's the kind of stuff that they would fly me all over the country to teach. And so we got there. And so the night, or that morning of September 11th, 2001, we're in San Diego, California.
Yeah.
And we had to report to a border patrol station, but there were going to be different kinds of law enforcement that were going to go there to be instructed. So long story short, of course, we couldn't fly out of California because of the whole situation. So we eventually got permission from the U.S. government to go ahead and get a rental car and drive home. And I mean, that's only the second time that I've driven through New Mexico. But I will say that we just knew we were close to border towns because we would see the signs. God bless the USA. Tacos 99 cents.
Okay, so here's my thing is the chili storm. It's amazing, right? It's probably the best, right, I've ever had. And I have family. My family on it's the other side. They come from New Mexico. They as early as the Spanish were there, and then before that. So I have history in New Mexico for forever, right?
Yeah.
However, I'm not so sure like what the fuck those grits are doing next to the chilaquiles. That is just a totally different like.
Is that New Mexico?
Yeah, that's New Mexican food. So there's like these like corned beef hash next to your like tacos. There's like just this weird like the wagon trail meets
Yeah,
norte. It's a weird.
that's funny.
It's kind of like a quantitative extension of the Denver omelet. Like I'm like it's kind of like that's kind of yeah.
Well, I mean, I will. Maybe I can explain it this way, Matt. From my understanding, as a food lover,
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know how I'm keeping this lovely svelte body, but let's say this. You'll even hear it from those uppity people in Austin, Texas, who you'll hear things like this, like, "Oh my God, like those are not authentic tacos, like because the corn tortillas are not being like made like right in front of you." And it's like, bro, You can go to tortilleria and get authentic tortillas, corn tortillas. Not only that, people will say such ridiculous things as, "Oh, flour tortillas are not Mexican." That is not even a little bit true. I mean, look into the history, learn something, don't be ignorant. Mexico is a huge country with so many flavors, so many ways of talking, speaking, definitely many ways of of making enchiladas for sure. And because of the geography, because of the weather, because of the desert life, the ranch areas, it's simple geography. Mexico again is a huge country, mountains, valleys, deserts. So, you cannot plant corn in every region of Mexico. It does not grow, believe it or not. Corn is, it's like don't be so ignorant that you think that every Mexican has a plants corn in their backyard. And I don't mean you, man. I mean just people in general.
Yeah.
And so back in the day, as people as colonialism expanded and so on, and settlers from Mexico, from wherever, I mean, within Mexico, moved on to other places. The natives had their own way of living. As you left Tenochtitlan, as you left that center, there were many other nations, many other types of people, who, and they had their own ways, and it wasn't all about the corn. Now, the Spaniards brought wheat, they brought flour with them. And because there's no water, there's no canals, there's no whatever, they cannot grow corn, but they can put flour in a sack, and make and just it just works, better. Chiles, dried corn, all that. Yes, you can travel with it, but it just wasn't available. So, I would think, that the dried maize, the dried corn, which is where hominy comes from to make menudo or pozole, hominy crushed into bits, like the cauliflower rice they have these days. I mean, that's the same concept of you get hominy and you chop it up into bits, and that's grits. In Boy Scouts, yeah.
I guess grits are Mexican. I just fucked up. I just didn't. I need to expand my thinking.
I mean, it's corn. It's corn, so it's freaking Mexican,
Yeah.
And,
I didn't see like that was pretty good. You this long weaving thing. I'm like, what is this guy talking about? And then by the time it hit me, I was not. I was unprepared. You lulled me.
I am my mother's son, Rosa Maria Garcia. Yeah. Hi, Mom. She is all about the tangents, and I'm her son.
No, you dropped the whammy on me. I did not see that coming. I was like, where is this guy going? And then by the time the punchline came, I was devastated.
You can put butter on a corn tortilla. You can put butter on a flour tortilla. You can put butter on grits.
Tortillas con mantequilla. Yeah. We have those out here too. So okay. Read us a poem and tell us where we can find your book.
Yeah. Cool. When we went to Louisiana as Boy Scouts, we were like, what do we do with these grits for breakfast? It's like, do we add milk, sugar, and cinnamon, or do we put butter and hot sauce like these dudes, Like, hey, and we tried both and they both worked. So, well, let me do something called En la Pulga. In the valley, we call pulga, we call what many people call a flea market. In California, they call it a swap meet, if I'm not mistaken. Let's see here. Whoa. Man, I need to look at the table of contents. I apologize.
Yeah,
so the book is called Sensonte Mockingbird, and the subtitle is Songs of Empowerment. And so many of the pieces here are in fact songs, and some are monologues and that sort of thing. And so here is a piece called En la Pulga. My friend Christopher Muniz and I used to started to try to write this song, if you will. We never finished it, but here it is. En la Pulga, at the swap meet, at the flea market. A new pair of sneakers, the latest full features, the parking's free, ya vente. A 94 Nissan, pero sin transmission. Your Theo Frank can fix it. St. Patrick's Day lights, some Clinton Gore kites, a wristwatch television. En la pulga se halla, se compra, se vende lo que pide la gente. Aquí tienen Legos, carritos y juegos. I wanna Spiro, papá. Aguacates, nopales, te llenan morrales con fruits y vegetales. Llantas pa' tus trailers, los domingos hay bailes, te ponen windshield wipers. En la pulga se halla, se compra, se vende lo que pide la gente. This last stanza mentions Corona, which is not the beer, and it's not a crown, but it's the corona, meaning a funeral wreath. Yo quiero gorditas, arroz y carnitas, frijoles a la charra. It's okay to have a grito here. Taquitos al gusto, te curan del susto, heridas sobadas. Un hot dog con todo, si me muero ni modo, también venden coronas. En la pulga se halla, se compra, se vende lo que pide la gente. Tan, tan. Is that your first grito during these interviews, Matt?
That is the first grito during these interviews. Yes, yeah, it is my first grito in like probably 5 years. So like,
Well, thank you.
Practice, but I think I did all right. All right, where can we find?
The book's available at Flower Song Press. Flower Song Press. You can find them on Facebook. You can find them on their website, Flower Song Press. Used to be called Flower Song Books, but they transitioned to Flower Song Press. And it's on Amazon and other places like that. If you have an independent bookstore, that you could probably order it from there as well. But it supports us more overall if you get it from the press, from Edward Vidaurre, and so I appreciate that.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you for your time, and we'll put the links in the comments below.
All right, thanks so much.
Thank you so much. Talk to you soon.